Consumer revolution, the increase in purchasing and ownership of luxury consumer goods. Colonial consumer culture made many Americans feel culturally connected to Britain. Commodity money, used because colonists lacked gold and silver coins. Currency Acts of 1751 and 1763, intended to restrict the use of paper money in the colonies. Sugar, a crop that made the British Caribbean colonies more profitable than the North American colonies. Navigation Acts, designed to enrich Britain by controlling colonial trade. Sugar Act 1764, angered colonists because it placed duties on everyday goods like sugar and tea. Urban slavery in northern port cities, most often associated with domestic and skilled trade work. Stono Rebellion 1739, a slave uprising in South Carolina seeking freedom in Spanish Florida. Quakers in Pennsylvania opposed slavery because they believed in pacifism and the equality of all souls. First colony to issue paper money, Massachusetts, which printed paper money in 1690 to pay soldiers after a war. Effective British Caribbean colonies on North American colonists. Created demand for surplus food and raw materials from the colonies. Task system allowed Carolina enslaved laborers to grow some of their own food after completing daily tasks. Primogeniture system, a system where the firstborn child inherits the entire estate. Colonial assemblies, they were composed of elected property-owning men and checked the governor's power. Charter colonies like Rhode Island had the most independence. George Whitefield, the most famous inherent preacher during the Great Awakening. Jonathan Edwards' sermon, sinners in the hands of angry God. Only heartfelt faith can save a person from God's wrath. 7 Years' War, the killing of a French diplomat by George Washington and allies sparked the conflict. Battle of the Plains of Abraham, 1759. It allowed Britain to capture Quebec and secure Canada. Pontiac, a Native American leader inspired by Neolin to resist British expansion. Royal Proclamation of 1763 restricted colonial settlement west of the Appalachian Mountains. Stamp Act 1765. It taxed printed material and legal documents without colonial consent. Economic activity connecting northern and southern colonies to the Caribbean. Slave trading and exporting food, lumber to sugar plantations. Quakers and colonial anti-slavery movements. They were the first group to disown members engaged in the slave trade. Gang system, a system of labor involving enslaved people working under strict supervision from dusk to dawn. Colonial print culture. New England had a strong tradition of printing, while southern colonies developed later. Benjamin Franklin's opposition to print culture. Franklin opposed the spread of print culture. Fall of Quebec in 1760. It reduced the threat of French Catholic influence in North America. Stono Rebellion, 1739, slave uprising in South Carolina. Currency Acts, British restrictions on colonial paper money. Gentility, colonists increasingly viewed the ability to purchase goods as a sign of gentility or social respectability. First paper money in the Western world, Massachusetts, 1690. Caribbean colonies' main crop. Caribbean colonies like Barbados and Jamaica were known for producing sugar, one of the most profitable crops. Task system in South Carolina, they used a task system allowing enslaved laborers some autonomy after completing assigned daily work. Quakers' stance on slavery. The Quakers in Pennsylvania began formally disowning members involved in the slave trade by 1758. Impact of credit on colonial society. Colonists could buy more imported goods on credit, making everyday life more comfortable and helping create a shared British identity. Trade between the North American colonies and Caribbean. The colonies shipped food, lumber, and livestock to Caribbean sugar islands in exchange for sugar, rum, and molasses. Slavery in Virginia versus South Carolina. Virginia had smaller tobacco farms using the gang system, while South Carolina had large rice plantations using the task system. Controversy over paper money. Colonial paper money often lost value, causing concern in Britain that it would hurt British merchants. Quaker beliefs on equality. Quakers believed all people were equal before God, leading them to oppose slavery. The Enlightenment. People began to use reason and logic to question authority in the government. John Locke's contribution. Locke asserted that all people have natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Montesquieu's idea. Montesquieu proposed that government power should be divided with checks and balances. Rousseau's social contract. Rousseau believed people form a social contract to follow laws for the good of all. The First Great Awakening, a religious movement 1730s, 1740s that emphasized personal faith over church authority. Leaders of the First Great Awakening. Key leaders included Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. Mercantism, economic theory stating that colonies exist to make money for England. Salutary neglect. Britain ignored strict trade laws like the Navigation Acts to focus on other issues. French and Indian War, conflict 1754-1763 between France and Britain for control of North American land and trade. Treaty of Paris ended the French and Indian War in 1763. Britain gained Canada, Florida, and lost land east of the Mississippi. Proclamation of 1763 banned colonists from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains, increasing mistrust between Britain and the colonies. Stamp Act, a 1765 act aimed to raise money to pay Britain's war debt, leading to colonial protests and the slogan, "No taxation without representation." Quartering Act, a 1765 act requiring colonists to house British troops which grew distrust of Britain. Townshend Acts, 1767 acts that taxed imported goods, tea, glass, paper, leading to boycotts and protests. Boston Massacre, an event in 1770 where British soldiers killed 5 colonists, sparking anger and unity against Britain. The Tea Act, 1773 act that helped with British East India Company sell tea cheaply, leading to the Boston Tea Party. Intolerable Acts, a series of punitive measures in 1774 against Massachusetts for the Tea Party, closing Boston Harbor and ending local government. First Continental Congress, a 1774 meeting aimed at creating a united response to British control, agreeing to boycott British goods. Battles of Lexington and Concord, Events in 1775, where British attempted to seize colonial weapons, marking the start of the American Revolution. Enlightenment, an intellectual movement that emphasized logic, rights, and self-government, inspiring the Declaration of Independence. Great Awakening, a religious revival that promoted faith and equality, unifying the colonies and challenging authority. Colonial unity, the result of shared strugglers, wars, religion, taxes that brought the colonies together. Path to revolution, the sequence of events leading to independence. French and Indian War, taxes, protests, war. French and Indian War timeline, 1754 to 1763, Britain wins, gain land, builds debt. Proclamation of 1763. 1763, angered colonists, limited expansion. Stamp Act and Quartering Act. 1765, protests began. Colonial unity grows. Townshend Acts. 1767, boycotts unite colonies. Boston Massacre. 1770, fueled anti-British feelings. Tea Act, Boston Tea Party. 1773, open rebellion starts. Intolerable Acts / First Continental Congress. 1774, colonies unite and organize. Lexington and Concord. 1775, war begins.